some of the words that we can think of that mean the same as humiliation mean the same thing as shame. Humiliation, disrespect, he uses that a lot. Um, Demeaning, diminishing. I don't know that he uses that much if he does, but it's right in there. One of the terms that he doesn't use a lot, but he does use some. And if I were if I thought of this beforehand, I could just tell you which paragraph it's in. Um, but it's towards the end, I think, is the concept of powerlessness. And one of the things that Gilligan is saying is that shame is a is a feeling of humiliation, but that feeling of humiliation frequently accompanies a feeling of powerlessness. And one of the things that our behavior does when we are shamed is try to get our power back. By power, I don't necessarily mean, wielding great power over countries and continents, but I do mean feeling effective in your behavior, feeling that you can act in such a way that you say achieve your goals or achieve your aims, and that you have some status and value and that you matter in the world. So a feeling of powerlessness is this feeling that there's nothing we can do. We've lost our ability to act. We've lost our ability to well, as I've said earlier in the term, we've lost our ability to place ourselves in the world. And you've heard me talk about this, I think, several times. One of the things that we do when we act is we place ourselves in the world. We say, "Here I am," and one of the things that Gilligan is saying is that that is a fundamental aspect of what it means to be a human being, is to place ourselves in the world. And what it means to have an identity is to place ourselves in the world. And so the feeling of powerlessness is this sense that we cannot place ourselves in the world, that we cannot or that we do not have an identity or have a self. And you've heard me say earlier in the term that having an identity depends on there being a community that recognizes us and a community that within which we live and within which we exist. That was one of the main points of the Credo. This is coffee. It's not my usual tea that I drink in class. I just wanted you to know that in case you were upset. So powerlessness is an inability to place ourselves in the world. You can think of it that way. And shame is the feeling that accompanies this. One of the terms, and I think it's a wonderful term that Gilligan uses to describe this, is the disintegration of the self, and where we feel our internal experiences that we're coming apart. It's chaos, that we are we sort of are spinning around and can't get our bearings. In other words, our self is coming apart. And so you've got all these terms that Gilligan and I use probably interchangeably some. And right, shame, diminishment, being demeaned, disrespected, disintegration of the self, and not being able to place ourselves in the world. So that's one of the big concepts. I mean, and so what Gilligan is saying in the article is that those feelings of shame, um, powerlessness, um, disintegration of the self lead to violence, and that they are the cause of violence. I'm going to make that a little bit clear. It's not shame by itself does not cause violence, but and so you should think of it this way: that what Gilligan is saying is that all shame is caused by violence. I'm sorry, let me try that again. All violence is caused by shame, but not all shame leads to violence. And and so let me say it again. It's such an important point. It's one of the great features of this article is to understand that idea, where that is that um, uh, all violence is caused by shame, but not all shame results in violence. And so Gilligan is going to try to answer why that is the case and tell us what that means. Um, and it seems to be at least obviously true that that all shame does not lead to violence. One of the aspects of our lives, and this is what I've asked you to think about on the uh, assignment that you had before this, is to give me some examples of when you have experienced um, shame, and therefore when you have been violent. And if you remember, and I think it's an important point, that by violence, Gilligan means what I've come to call big anger, hostile feelings. It's not necessarily that we act physically. We do sometimes act physically on that, but it means big anger, as well as physical violence. And so what Gilligan is saying is that um, big anger, violence are caused by shame, but not all shame leads to violence. And so one of the questions that, and it's a key question for Gilligan is what we all. So the point is, we all experience being shamed. That's one of the main points I was getting at. We all experience shame, but we're not all violent. We're certainly not all violent whenever we experience shame or diminishment or powerlessness, and but because if we were always violent whenever we felt shame, we'd be violent a lot. There'd be much more violence than there is now, and there's already probably a lot, certainly in our country, which is also one of Gilligan's important points at the beginning of the article. So, so um, one of the things that Gilligan is saying is, what is the difference between someone who experiences shame, who is violent, and someone who experiences shame, who is not violent? And we could also look at that another way, which is, what is the difference between between me when I'm feeling shame or powerlessness and I'm not violent, and when I'm experiencing shame and I am violent? How are those distinguished? And so, going back to this other main point, is that all violence is caused by shame, but not all shame results in violence. And so, what is the difference between me or another person who is shamed and not violent, and me or another person who is shamed and violent? That's really what Gilligan is after here. And I've asked you to give an experience, maybe not too personal. I've also shared one of I wrote my little cute line about it when I was in 11th grade, and I had gotten a very bad haircut, at least one that I hated. And I walked into my high school the next morning into the room where essentially 1,000 people gathered. Well, I don't know if they were people, they were students, but 1,000 students gathered, and before classes, and milled about saying what teenagers do. And I walk into this room called the social room. It was at Cleveland Heights High. I think it was 1966 probably. And I had this very bad haircut. I walk into the room, and there's one kid that I'd been, for who knows what reason, this other student, um, he and I had been sort of jawing at each other for a couple of weeks preceding that. I walk in to the social room, 1,000 students. He sees me and he says, in a loud voice so that everybody can hear, he says, "Ah, look at Sloman, look at his haircut. It looks like crap. He's a jerk." And he goes on like this for a little bit. And I was very pissed off. And I walked up to him. I had some sense of not wanting to be expelled from school at that particular moment. So I challenged him to a fight after school. To make a long story short, we did fight. He had his friends, I had my friends. The two of us fought. I won a couple times. I did not damage him badly, um, but uh, um, but when I think about that experience, I know that the reason I got so pissed off was because he was humiliating me, and disrespecting me in a very public way. And my fight was, as Gilligan describes it, my challenging him to a fight, and the fight afterward was to try to gain respect back, to try to gain my sense of self. As I said in my brief notes on this in the reading, hair is destiny, particularly in high school. If if my hair is bad, um, uh, you know, the world is coming to an end. It was certainly true then for me. It's a little true now, probably. My hair is very long. It's long, and it's a little bit strange for me the last couple of years. But anyway, um, uh, that example is an example of shame causing violence. Now, obviously, as I've said, we're shamed a lot, we're diminished a lot, uh, we feel powerless a lot, but we're not always violent. So why is that? And as Gilligan goes through this, he explains it. That's point one on this list, and I'm looking at it if you want to know what I'm doing. Um, and the second point on it is the cause of shame is the rejection of our wishes to be loved, to belong, to be a part of some human group that cares for and about us. Um, One of the things that Gilligan was saying is that, and this is kind of hidden in this, he doesn't quite say it this way, this, the way I'm going to put it, but he means this, and that is that for Gilligan, um, he believes that our most fundamental need, our most fundamental desire, is the desire to be loved, is the desire to belong, and to be and to matter. Um, are all of these exactly the same? Maybe not quite exactly, but they're pretty close. They are expressions of each other. We belong, we are who we are fundamentally because we belong to a human group, a human community. And as I've said earlier, 10 or 15 minutes ago, it's fundamental. We've talked about it before. The community is the basis of who we are as the people, as the individual selves, the individual identities that we have. And so we depend on the community in fundamental ways. And that dependence, one way of thinking about it is that dependence is a an expression of our need to be loved, or our need to be loved is is uh, uh, is an expression of that dependence. And so and this you know this has a number of different ways of thinking about it. We are I mean, you can put this in different ways. So, it's not by saying that our fundamental need is the desire to be loved. It's not saying that we want to go up to everybody and hug them and say, "Oh, I love you so much. You're the most important person." Sometimes we want to say that, and sometimes we want to hear that in that way. But one of the ways that we can think about this desire to be loved is that it expresses itself in our belonging to groups where we have a place in that group. I might use as an example being on a team, being on a sports team is an expression of that desire. We are a part of something. We have rituals, and every sport has different rituals of belonging and of sharing and of making the participants on that team feel like they belong. Um, and and when we do well in a sport on a team on a given night, or a given day or event, we 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 know that that depends also on the team. It's so interesting when we hear people, really huge stars. Um, and I want to say people, the big example for Cleveland, I suppose, in the last 20 years would be LeBron James. As a wonderful player as he is, he always thanked his teammates. He always said that his success was dependent on the other players, was dependent on the team's success. And one of the interesting ways that works is that, and LeBron James's career shows this, as I think almost all sports do. You can have the finest players maybe in the world on your team, but if you don't come together as a team, if you don't feel like a unit, if you don't all care about each other, is what I would want to say, if you don't feel that same belongingness and part of that community, even though you've got these great players on one team, it doesn't function well. And so what you want is a team not only to all be on the same, physically the same team. You want them to feel loved. You want them to feel like they belong. You want them to feel like they are a part of a unity, and where everybody is loved. And so you get it on teams. You obviously you have we experience this need to belong with friends and with family. That's what those units are about. They are about the satisfying desire to be loved. That's why those are so. That's why those are so important in our lives. Um, and so that leads me to say that one of the primary examples a um, of feeling rejected or humiliated and feeling powerless, certainly, is rejection in a relationship. Um, and and what you see, and I mean in a romantic relationship. Um, One of the statistics that we find, and I think it's pretty general, I know it's true in the United States, is that um, most violent or much violence, much really bad violence, big anger, all the way to homicide, happens between romantic mates. And so what you see is that in the huge number of people that are murdered each year in the United States, and I forget what the figure is now, but it's high. It's at least 15,000, and there are general kinds of, a number of kinds of murder. It may be much higher than that, depending on what you include and what you don't. But one of the things that you find is that I'm not really laughing in a funny way. One of the things that you find is that the majority of homicides in the United States are between romantic mates. Why is that? It's because we get our major need to be loved fulfilled in romantic relationships, and as well as that, we are the most vulnerable in romantic relationships. And so when a boyfriend or girlfriend rejects us, we feel it's demeaning, it's diminishing, it's humiliating, it's shameful. We feel powerless in those situations. And my guess is that most of you have been in a relationship probably where you've been rejected, and you know that I'm guessing that you feel and you get really angry, and you probably get to the point of yelling, or at least I think there's a good chance that you get to the point of yelling, and maybe unfortunately and maybe tragically, more than just yelling. And so what everything that Gilligan is saying, that shame causes violence, depends on recognizing that he is also saying that our fundamental need is the need to be loved, this desire to be loved. And he's going on to say that it's the rejection of that desire to be loved that causes shame. That's the feeling that arises. And that is point number 3, where he says, our protection against feeling shame or being disrespected is concealed by aggression and violence. That is, violence conceals our wishes to be loved and our fear of the rejection of those wishes. That what Gilligan is saying is that because rejection, for instance, as a primary example of humiliation, of shame, because it's such a horrible feeling, we try to conceal that we feel shame, that we feel powerless, and the way that we try to conceal it is by going to the opposite. I mean, you can think of it this way: if love is the most, if our desire to be loved is the most fundamental desire, what would explain I want to say the most extreme act by human beings, which is violence? I mean, violence is extreme. I think we can all agree to that. And so what you've got is this tremendously extreme behavior or action that we call violence. And what would lead us to violence is the rejection of something that on the other side was so fundamental. And so you've got our fundamental need to be loved, and our which is kind of extreme in that way, and you've got this extreme reaction then, violence, to the rejection of that fundamental desire. I mean, it creates kind of a nice, a nice balance there. If you can think about it, you can see why we're violent if you understand that violence is caused by the rejection of our fundamental need, and so our fundamental desire to be loved. And so in relationships, when we're rejected, we because it's such a horrible feeling, it's the denial of our identity. It's the denial of self. It's the disintegration of self, as Gilligan calls it, in order to conceal that feeling as much from ourselves, probably, as to the other person. We become violent. What is the best way to conceal this fundamental desire but to go to the opposite end and to say, I don't have a desire to be loved. Look at how I'm making myself. In fact, I don't depend on you at all. I don't depend on you um, accepting me or loving me. And the way I'm going to show you that I don't depend on that is by making myself hateable, is by doing something so extreme that I become unlovable. And that will show you that I don't have a need for love. And what is the best way to become unlovable, to conceal my desire to be loved? It's by going to the opposite extreme of being violent. I don't need you. I don't need this. And we say that in relationships when we're rejected or when we're arguing. I don't need you. I don't love you anymore. Um, you don't, I don't need you. Get out of here. It's the way that we say, my identity is not premised on your accepting me, on your loving me. And the best way, the fastest way to get there, perhaps, is by being violent. So when Gilligan says violence conceals our wishes to be loved, um, what he's saying is that this feeling of shame is so intense because our desire is to be loved is so intense, and the rejection that we feel from that desire being rejected is that shame is so intense we have to deny it in some way. Um, so these are sort of the first 3 points, and one of the things that I've done in this is to as you've seen in the reading, is to number these passages, um, uh, number these paragraphs, and so one of the paragraphs that I want to point to for this third point on the post that I made tonight is paragraph number 28, and I'm going to read it. It's on page 5. Gilligan says, shame motivates hostility toward others, which is usually limited to hostile thoughts and feelings, but can culminate in hostile behavior as well, escalating to violence when nothing else is perceived as being capable of rescuing self-esteem or national honor. The purpose of violence is to restore and maintain respect for oneself or the social group with which one has identified: family, class, race, ethnic group, religion, nation, when the self of a group is perceived as having been shamed, insulted, or treated with disrespect. People need a certain minimal sense of pride and dignity, since to be overwhelmed by feelings of personal or national shame and humiliation is experienced psychologically as tantamount to the disintegration or death of the self, or what amounts to the same thing, of the group one is identified with, and it is characteristically accompanied by the feeling and the fear of that dissolution of the self, termed by people going through the experience going crazy. And then he says in paragraph 30 that starts on page 5, also, he says, perhaps the simplest way to sum up the theory of violence I'm presenting here is to say that the most direct way to stop others from laughing at oneself, which is what people who feel ashamed perceive as happening, whether it is or not, is to make them weep instead. And the easiest and surest way to accomplish that is by means of physical violence. There's so much in these couple passages. And one of the points in these passages is that it's not only our very personal feelings of being rejected, But as I've pointed to, and said a number of times throughout the term and now, um, our identities are premised uh, on the group, on the community that we are members of, and this means both large communities and small communities. So I use the example of belonging to a team as satisfying our desire to be loved. And that is why when our team is disrespected, we get into fights protecting our team's honor, our team's respect. When our family is disrespected or dishonored or humiliated, we get into fights protecting the honor of our family. When our community is disrespected, and I mean by community in this example, even our national community, we go to war. And so Gilligan is not saying just narrowly define um, disrespect for me as an isolated person, because we're not isolated people, you know, creatures. He's also saying that my identity as a person depends on my community. Again, the point in the Crito that I was trying to make to Socrates. Um, and so one of the examples I would give here is, and many of you, most of you, I think, were born, well, around 9/11. And one of the things that happened after 9/11, a horrible event, obviously, in the life of our country. And George W. Bush was president, and the day after the bombing, one of the things that President Bush said was, he was talking to the nation, and I mean, it was a horrible time, and he said something to the effect of, "You people who bombed us, who did this, um, we're 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 ready we're ready for this. Come and get us, or you wait. We're gonna get you." I mean, it was the kind of statement that you might hear a teenager say. "Oh yeah, come and get it. You think you're tough? Yeah, well, we're going to show you." I mean, it was in that context, and if I wasn't in the middle of a recorded lecture, um, I'd look for it. I have it written down. I can't quite remember it. But the point is that George Bush was saying our national honor has been violated, and we're going to get you. The point is, um, you need to see how much our individual identities are premised on the community. And when we say this need to be loved, this sense of being disrespected, concealing or trying to conceal our our um, our shame and humiliation, we react in ways to say we don't need you. It happens at a national level as well as an individual level, and you see it in all these pieces: defending your team's honor, defending your family's honor, defending our country's honor. Um, all of that is premised on the idea of being disrespected, and the need to be loved. I'm going to stop this now. I intend to come back, and we'll have part two. I'll see you. I'll see you shortly.